Hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of the SME Strategy and Leadership Podcast. My name is Anthony Taylor. I'm the CEO at SME Strategy. We facilitate strategic planning sessions and help teams get aligned on where they want to go and build a plan to get there. And my guest today is Andrew Miller, who's got a couple different jobs and titles. President, CEO of the United Way of Skagit County, co-founder, CEO, Tulip Valley Farms. He's a Skagit PUD commissioner. One of the things that I could talk to Andrew about a lot of things. He could share a lot of things with me. I really want to focus on the work that hi Andrew, are doing on the farm, the turnaround. Welcome, Andrew Miller. Thanks for being here today.
Hey, it's great to be here. I'm excited to have this conversation.
So tell me, how did someone who is colorblind was in, I want to say, I can't remember if make sure it's not Air Force, retired Air Force intelligence. How did you get into tulip farming?
I woke up one day, I was at Amazon and I'd had 3 bosses in 9 months. And I just thought there's probably a better way for me to wear my life out than helping Jeff Bezos become more billionaire, right? He didn't figure he needed my help anymore. So I did what any self-respecting kid who grew up in a farm town would do. And I moved home. I grew up in Mount Vernon and we were living down in just south of Seattle. And I decided the only qualification I have for being a farmer is that I have 6 kids. And Mount Vernon, Skagit Valley is a beautiful place. It's a wonderful place to grow up. And so I figured I was going to make the best choice for my family, and that was we were going to move home and figure it out. And as a strategist, my background, I have a law degree and an MBA and a degree in strategy. But what does a strategist do when they move home to a community of 120,000 people? In the whole county, right? Very small. I went very big to very small. And I got a job in economic development, believe it or not. And so I had the unique privilege of seeing the community that I grew up in with fresh eyes. And part of my portfolio was to try to figure out what it was that as a community we could be the best in the world at, or at least in the region. And so I dug right in where, what are we known for here in Skagit Valley? And of course, if you can pronounce Skagit correctly, then you associate it with tulips, right? Mm. And so I dove right in and kind of really focused on what it was that made Skagit unique. And I landed on 3 really unique principles or at least functional areas. Value-added ag and food is and outdoor recreation and travel. And then arts, culture, events, and entertainment. And those were the focus areas that I thought that we could create a lot of value and that were approachable for new businesses. And these are things that, based on our geography, we could be really good at. And so, as part of that, I had a lot of conversations with a lot of stakeholders that ended with, "Hey, Andrew, if it's such a good idea, why don't you do it?" Right? Just getting out of that kind of consultant, you try to help other people see the light. And finally, I'm the oldest of 5 kids and a Leo, and I don't need a challenge like that. So finally I said, you know what, I will. So one of the 2 remaining tulip farms down here was for sale, and I put together a group of friends and with some capital and some nerve, and we dove right into tulip farming. And I was the one that was able to transition to do it full time, and so I took over that farm and I ran that for 3 years. My first year out of the gate was COVID, so I only know how to do farming the hard way, and I only know disruption in tulips. And like every business and every relationship has an arc, and so about 3 years ago, I found myself at different ends of some ideas than those partners, and I decided that I was going to strike out on my own. And in so doing, I had 3 years experience in tulips, but I looked around the country, and actually in the US and Canada, there are about 150 farms that do you-pick tulips. And I had continually tried to figure out with their existing business model, how could we create more revenue? And that was one of them. To be able to do you-pick, people wanted more than just to stand in a pretty field and take pictures. They wanted experiences. I am in the emotional souvenir business, right? People are there for pictures. And so I double clicked on that, and we started off and we did a proof of concept, and people end up really enjoying you-pick tulips. And here we are in our 3rd season. We just wrapped up our 3rd season, and we've grown year over year, and we had a banner year this year. Revenue's up 35%, right, in 3 years. And so it kind of proved the concept that we're onto something. But I like to tell people I am the least likely tulip farmer in the world. I have 4 graduate degrees and not a single natural science class. And as you mentioned, I'm colorblind. But I like to say I know a blinking red light when the demand signal shows itself to me.
I said, like, you can have any color you want as long as it's gray. But here's the things I want to take from this. So first of all, obviously, working with a big company like Amazon, you've got a lot to learn. Obviously, a lot of experience from Air Force and other businesses.
Mm-hmm.
As you're working in economic development, taking the opportunity to talk to people, to understand, to know the terrain. For you as like as a strategist to say, hey, I need to look at priorities. So in that past job and recognizing that you've got a lot of hats, that, hey, here are the places where we can have a long-term sustainable competitive advantage. Let's not try to do everything. Let's recognize the competitive marketplace and landscape. I'll just kind of take a pause as, in 2025 as a podcast host, I'm really trying to make the distinction between strategic planning and strategy. Strategic planning is the tactics, the prioritization, the vision, but strategy is recognizing all the different levers and drivers of those things moving.
Mm-hmm.
For our audience, as you say, hey, I've got strategic priorities. You talked to a bunch of people. They said, hey, do it. You found a great opportunity, but recognizing that in order to make this profitable in the long term, you had to adapt. You had to be really mindful of what business you're in, and then saying, hey, I'm actually in the memories souvenir business. And then you've adapted your model from there. And then also recognizing that there's a couple people that do this really well and you could probably learn from them. So I was trying to capture most of the learnings that you've had in driving a tulip farm, but you're still able to apply the fundamentals of what make you a good strategist, business person, to look at the domain, make the most of it. Do I more or less have that?
Oh yeah, you nailed it. And the one thing I would say is that I like to say, so I don't have the burden. That's the upside of being new to farming and new to this industry is I don't have the burden of convention. I'm very unconventional, right? I don't have the burden of we've always done it this way. I like to tell people I'm not even Dutch, right? So I don't have some great grandfather whose ghost wakes me up in the middle of the night for not doing the things the way that he did him. And so that really provides, I get some both runway to be able to try things, but I'm also not constrained by convention. I don't have to say, well, it's always been done that way. And so I think that's both, it's great and terrible in that I don't have the comfort, but I don't know which part of that. It's sometimes it's I'd say it's more great than comfortable. I would rather grow than be comfortable. And so here we are.
I think that's, I'm biased as a facilitator consultant, but, just before this, I was talking to somebody and said, I came from a big organization. Now I'm a year into this one. And I recommend to folks, like, maintain that beginner's mindset, that objective mindset as long as possible. Because when you're in a company, especially if it's founder led 10, 20, 30 years or a family business over generations, there's the way we've always done things. Yes, it works. And yes, you should understand, but not being limiting to those things. The other thing talking about farming is there was a book. Can't remember the book. I said, like, farmers are going to be the ones driving Lamborghinis. And so, like, in 2030, I think that there's just so much opportunity for farming. So who knows what will evolve there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the work that you're also doing with the United Way? In our
Yeah,
peak
you
call, I
bet.
said, hey, we're transforming that organization. So it sounds like transformation is really part of the work that you do. So how are you approaching your transformation? And of course, recognizing it's you as a person versus
Right.
the organization in itself. How do you see organizational transformation?
It is a really, I'm glad you pointed that out. I was not board member at the United Way, and it's one thing to be on the sidelines and supporting as a director, and then basically we had an implosion. We had a board chair and a CEO that did not see things eye to eye, and they both ended up going away. And so I was kind of the one who could step in and provide some executive leadership. And I figured out that I really enjoyed it. It was a social innovation aspect to be able to sit down again at a fresh whiteboard and say, what is it? We have an established mission. There are some expectations for locally informed good that can happen in our community. Since nobody here has been around this before, how do we want to do it? And so it has all of the challenges of the tension between I had to completely rebuild the board. So there wasn't you want to have a board supported strategy, but I had to have enough of a draw of the good that could happen to attract board members. Because if you just hey, we need some new board members, like, well, what are we going to do? And it's that, well, what do you want to do? Who wants to do what? And so I had this to take the scope of the opportunity and distill it into some actionable and approachable avenues, and I call them avenues because there's not necessarily an end state that's been identified, and it's like, well, you look at the challenge and say, well, housing. Well, housing's like saying illness, right? Well, what do you want to do about it, right? That's not a challenge. It's a topic, right? And we need more than topics. And so that was quite interesting. At the same time, there's staff that necessarily had, staff that was rode hard and put away wet, right? And so they weren't really excited about the organization. And so culture wise, there's the reset on the culture. I felt like step one was a rescue, just to figure out whether this thing is worth reviving, and it absolutely is. And then you just to figure out, okay, what's a reset look like with external stakeholders and with a revenue model that didn't exist? And you're looking backwards and saying the United Way, the business model of people filling out the Scantron at work, workplace giving, what's workplace, right? Post COVID, if you're doing the same thing that you were doing. And so that's a huge challenge to turn around and say, well, what are we going to do in terms of generating the resources that we need in the community? And also, how are we not going to duplicate efforts and do what the Boys and Girls Club is doing, or what the YMCA is doing, or what Community Action are doing? And so it's a lot of those external conversations to be able to say, what are the gaps? And so my approach then became a map and gap is what I would tell people. What we want to do is we want to find out what's going on, what's not going on. We want to amplify the good and then come up with solutions for the things that aren't being done. Bumper sticker is what attracted the attention of a set of board members. They said, okay, map and gap, I can get on board for that. I will give you the time and the energy that you need, Andrew, from a board perspective to do that. And then I had kind of a right and left to go forward and say, here are the 4 functional areas of the United Way, and we've done this in the past, and we're not going to do this anymore, and this is who that's going to upset. And so I had to call on a lot of my experience, and frankly, a lot of it was being able to, with a smile, tell people, I don't know. What are we going to do in this area? I don't know, right? And enthusiastically say, but we'll find out. And so that is something that, again, I throughout my entire career, I've been able to, in a high performance organization, you're expected to know something, almost like, unless you're the boss, right? If you're at the top, you can actually say the scope of the opportunity here is so great that we're going to get to pick. But in order to get to pick, we're going to have to get to a perspective. We're going to have to get to that vantage point where we can actually see, and we're not out of the woods. And my organization is still not out of the woods, but we are headed in the right direction.
So what I wrote down, and just because, there will be some sort of transcription on this, but what I got was like, evaluate where you're at, reset it, reimagine. I wrote position, and that was before you had said map and gap, which is basically the same thing. And then execute is fundamentally the final step in terms of how to move that forward and like fill those gaps. I love it. I think it's what's so important, it's the same thing that you did for the Tulip farm. You looked at it, you evaluated, you did it. So for any entrepreneur, good opportunity to look. For any nonprofit, which is, nonprofits are getting their asses kicked right now, really looking at that and saying, hey, how can we reposition? How can we do those things? How can we, prioritize what we need to do? How do we attract the right people? Okay, I know we're going to shift gears a little bit one last time today. What makes a really, really good intelligence officer? What makes somebody who succeeds in the world of intelligence?
Ultimately, it's curiosity without judgment. It's being able to come in and my favorite thing when I was briefing, especially generals or high-ranking officials, was to be able to give my presentation, and then at the end, last slide was, I would say, I reserve the right to come back here in 5 minutes and tell you everything that I just told you has changed, because it does, right? If you're trying to take a snapshot of the way that things are, it is only as good as the environment or that time and space, right, to be able to do that. And so what that allowed me to do is just be intensely and almost illogically curious about, because the complexity of what an intelligence officer can be expected to understand. I mean, from gimbal limits of air-to-air radars to the political complexities of water fights in Kashmir, right?
So I got to caveat this for everybody else playing at home, because I have information that you don't. So Andrew spent almost 15 years in the United States Air Force, almost 10 years as a foreign area officer overseeing Latin America. And so recognizing that I assert, and this is part of that, is understanding the who's and what's and where's going on, and understand how to play within that terrain. And Absolutely. Then that here's the information I gave you, because this is everything I know up until this point. And because we do not live in a static environment, whether that's looking at geopolitical situations or the economy as it is in 2025, it's not a fixed state. And so what I think you're saying, Andrew, and I know you're saying it, but hopefully, is looking at it and saying, hey, it is not a thing. It is not an object. It is malleable. And the ability and the understanding and the whatever the opposite of ego, humility, to say,
Yeah.
I don't know everything and everything isn't the way I say it is key to both being a successful intelligence officer and, dare I say, entrepreneur.
Absolutely. No, that hubris will get you killed in any situation. If you just expect things to remain the same, I think that's cute. I would tell, frankly, we were talking about the farmers. I think it's cute in any industry that they think that there's some degree of romanticism that means that you don't have to change. And every industry out there is the same. And so I have been blessed with a career full of continually updated neural pathways, right? Whatever I thought was true, I have to check in. I think there's a joke in Washington, D.C. is that you go to sleep thinking where all the political landmines are, and then they move around at night. You have to wake up every morning and look for the new ones, right? And that is, I think, increasingly the case in any business, in any organization. If you think things are going to be the same way a year from now or a week from now, you just don't know. And if you have that fixed mindset, you're going to get crushed. Because the rate of change, if the rate of change outside of your organization is faster than the rate of change inside of your organization, you're on borrowed time. And that is not something that government will teach you. That is not something you learn at school. That is something that you learn by being slow. You learn to watch for the bus crossing the street by almost getting hit by one. You can read about it, but it is another thing to have a bus bearing down on you because you weren't paying attention. And that is very much the case, I think, in the organizations that are agile and have structure themselves and their cultures to be able to capitalize on those changes, or they mean the ones that live.
Yeah, I think it's really critical that you bring in that culture component. Again, in 2025, the speed of change is why we do 3-year strategic plans, not 5-year strategic plans. And then it's not a laminated document, but rather a set of processes to keep the strategic conversations up. And that as you are a leader, CEO, board member, as you are a manager, middle manager or otherwise, or even an employee, because we have folks all over the place, your ability and understanding and recognizance of the speed of change and to adapt to it with it, and even, dare I say, try to get ahead of it, which obviously is its own challenge. So, Andrew, as we finish up here, what are you most looking forward to with a career? So that's whether that's your career as a, public servant CEO, whether that's an entrepreneur, whether that's a, family man, what are you most looking forward to in your life as of today?
Most looking forward to figuring out what the next spin looks like for our farm. In terms of we've identified a customer set, we've identified a price point, we've identified a lot of the things that are working, and now I'm excited to see what's adjacent. How can we continue to create value that people find worth making a drive for and paying for? But I think there's some adjacencies there that I'm really excited about diving into. Is it a longer season? Is it other flowers? Is it coming up with whatever? Because that is it's such, to excuse the pun, is such fresh soil for me because I've never done it before. And so that to me, it really activates a lot of the questions. I get to build new teams. The scope of the opportunity in that space is really, it's very enlivening.
Oh, I say it's blooming for another.
Yes, absolutely. Boldly.
And because I saw that one of your previous pilot programs, securing environmental and economic development. So planting the seeds for what's possible. There's no shortage of puns on the Strategy and Leadership podcast.
Yeah.
Andrew, thanks so much for being here. I look forward to, I'm not on Instagram anymore. Otherwise, I would do myself a selfie at your farm, but I'll definitely come down and say hi to my friends in Skagit County. Where can people connect with you? Where can they visit your farm? Where can they learn more about the work you're doing at United Way?
You bet. So our website for the farm is tulipvalley.com, and for the United Way is unitedwayskagit.org. Loved it. Thank you.
Reach out to us. We can facilitate your strategic planning offsite. We are booking for the fall of 2025. So reach out. Thanks again for being here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for liking. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for enjoying the show. Until next time.